Good evening and welcome to the community room here at the Needham Free Public Library for tonight's presentation. Tonight, we are pleased to start off the LFN Author Series. Matt Robinson, who is going to be our host and interviewee, so to speak, for tonight's presentation, is the producer and host of the Writer's Block on the Needham channel. For the past 30 years, he has taught hundreds of international students at all levels, from kindergarten to college, and currently supports inmates at the Norfolk County Sheriff's Office through courses on writing and entrepreneurial skills. He is a regular correspondent on WBZ Radio, where he discusses food with legendary broadcaster Jordan Rich, who Matt will be interviewing here on April 30th. He's also published thousands of articles on a wide range of topics and also has helped many entrepreneurs and not-for-profit organizations with writing and communications products. He is also an author himself. His book, Lions, Tigers, and Bulldogs, an official guide to the legends and lore of the Ivy League, has inspired many students to apply to college and apparently helped some gain admission. But we are here tonight to hear Dr. Bruce Cohen. He received his bachelor's degree in pre-physical therapy and psychology from Rutgers, his master's in clinical exercise physiology from Northeastern, and completed a PhD in exercise, health, and sports psychology at Temple University. Dr. Bruce has consulted on the development of wellness/fitness programs and standards for the United States Public Health Service, and has also published research for the Department of Defense into the psychosocial and physiological aspects associated with health and fitness, as well as mental and physical optimal performance. He is a certified exercise physiologist and strength and conditioning specialist. Bruce has 35 years of experience in wellness, fitness, sports, and performance coaching, and specializes in working with older clients, so to speak. His new book, Excusercise, Inexcusable Exercise Excuses for the Non-Exercising, offers practical and actionable advice for people who find it difficult to fit fitness in, by providing strategies to overcome the excuses we all make to avoid what we know we need in order to stay healthy and fit. So without further ado, we're going to let Matt and Bruce take us on from here.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Our kickoff event. It's good to have my old friend Bruce in the other chair to ease me into this. So thank you all for taking the time. Who has a habit of making New Year's resolutions? We got a show of hands? Who usually has something fitness, health related on that list? It's February in 2 days. Who's busted it already? Okay, that's kind of why we're here. As you can see, while the Hometown Weekly had the scoop first, our colleagues at a little paper called the New York Times, I really wish them well, had a story about making excuses for exercise. So apparently this is a very timely topic, and we have a real expert to share his wisdom with us. So I'm going to let Bruce tell us how you first got into fitness and health and what kept you inspired to make it your life's work.
Define fitness.
You define fitness. You're the expert.
Or health, or wealth. Well, it all started when I was a toddler, or an infant. I don't recall. My parents would put me down and I would run away. And in Richfield, New Jersey, that meant running to a fire escape and escaping. So I learned early on to be active if you wanted attention, for one thing, from your parents. But also the joy and the enjoyment of movement. It was established early and encouraged. We played in sports. I participated in cross-country, track and field through college and after college for a number of years, and have gravitated to a variety of racket sports over the years, and now it's even gone to pickleball. Anyone? Yes, pickleball, which has its pros and cons, which we probably can talk about at some point. But so there was a point when actually I was younger, in junior high school, and the coach of the basketball team was also the coach of the cross-country team. So if you didn't go out for a fall sport like soccer or football, he said, come on out for the cross-country team so you can get ready for basketball. And I'm like, okay, that's what we want to do. And it ended up being my first introduction to actual organized training was cross-country practice, because the coach had a list of things to do, as far as it wasn't just play anymore. It all of a sudden became sort of work, but it was enjoyable because we were with friends. It didn't really help our basketball team too well. We were not very good, but we were never tired, let's put it that way. We were able to outrun people, but I think, there was only 3 people taller than me on the team, which is not saying much for the height. But it stuck with me that kind of activity would be useful. And eventually what I ended up doing in college was sort of combining interest in exercise and training for purposes of rehabilitation, let alone from an injury, but from prevention standpoints, and made it into a career in terms of looking at, even researching at, which was done over here at the Army Natick Labs. So I've been fortunate enough to have that kind of background where I'm able to combine both an interest with a vocation with a recreation, so to speak.
How did you get involved with the government and the military?
When I first started with the government, it was actually the U.S. Public Health Service, Division of Federal Occupational Health. When they're responsible for putting health units, and at the time, it was the late 80s. Should I even give that information away? Yeah. Actually, it was the 1880s. That's how old I am. See what exercise does for you. It keeps you looking young. In the late 1980s, didn't have, corporate wellness fitness hadn't hit the federal government, and I took a job when I was finishing up my master's at Northeastern, and it allowed me to help put in fitness centers, corporate wellness fitness centers on a government shoestring budget, which was interesting because I was their regional 1 director, and we got to set standards for what could be considered proper practice, medical clearance for a fitness center, because we didn't want to have people, Uncle Sam didn't want to injure their people on the job, because that would sort of be a lawsuit of sorts, let alone some possibilities for having absenteeism. And the object of the program was to do the opposite. So I started that's where I got my first introduction with the government. And then I left to go to grad school down in Philadelphia to work on my dissertation, which we're going to talk about because it's related to, it's actually comes out of my dissertation. And then I took a job coming back up to Boston where we had a human performance lab, which is basically dealing with athletes and how to train athletes, which is sort of the other end of the spectrum of the Excusercise. Athletes are often, or the athletic mindset, people who overtrain rather than undertrain, and that has its issues as well as far as injury prevention required. But they're a smaller segment of the population. We're talking about, when we talk about people not exercising enough to get the benefits that the health and the medical community say we have available, that's about 80% of the population, unfortunately. But the people who exercise too much, maybe only like 3 to 4% of the population. So there's a larger amount of people that could benefit from more frequent exercise, and there's a small percentage of people who could benefit from doing less exercise. Less or more or less. And when I got involved with the military, we were looking at doing a lot of experiments that were designed to improve the quality and the health of the soldier at the Army Natick Labs, and without injuring or breaking them. So how do we get people to perform better, stronger, faster? We have bone health programs. We had an occupational test put together to determine whether or not if the best person, regardless of sex or gender, male or female, can do the job. You're qualified for the Army. You're qualified for this position. And that came about in the early, around 2013 to recently. So because women were allowed to participate in combat arms And so the training was a little more vigorous. So again, there were men and women some men that probably were not qualified to do the job that they were doing, and there were women who were more qualified to do the job than they were doing. And this test that we designed actually proved that, and they use that now to determine when a recruit joins the military, the Army in particular, what's the best position, like on a team, what's the best position for them to participate in so they don't get injured and they also perform very well. So that was sort of my, and then we've had a bunch of psychosocial studies done and mental toughness and hardiness, and I also do some things called psychological flow, which people may know is sort of in the zone. You probably have heard that terminology. What are the mechanisms that can get people into the zone quicker so they stay on task longer what they're doing. And that kind of parlays a little bit into excusercise in that regard too, because if you don't like what you're doing, you're not going to be doing it for very long. So one of the things we'll talk about later is that the enjoyment factor of physical activity, it doesn't have to be structured exercise, but of physical activity in general, you should be enjoying it. And if you're not, then find something that you do enjoy.
So having worked with such a wide range of levels of participation and mindset, how did you find your subjects for your dissertation study? How did you decide to go more on the end of people who don't exercise enough than the median or the over exercises?
We bribed them. No. When I was working at the Federal Occupational Health, my job was to put up fitness centers, and interestingly enough, the facilities, the ones in particular where most of the subjects of the study, my dissertation came from, were in Boston. Their agencies gave them matching time so they can come down to the fitness center. So some federal agents have, and employees have what's called a fit for duty requirement. Most of them are gun toters. Every agency has a gun toter. If you're from the Social Security Administration or the IRS, they have criminal investigative divisions, and these people all have a fit for duty requirement. And in order to do that, they must pass a physical fitness test twice a year. A few times during that time period, what happened was that people would not train for their tests that were twice a year. They would wait until a week or two beforehand, and they would go out and work themselves to death. And in fact, 2 people died while doing their fitness test. And we were incorporated in to try and put together these wellness fitness centers that would make sure that didn't happen. And oh, by the way, it would be good for everybody to be participating in wellness. So my population from that was, the real impetus for the study was, well, how do we get these people, we gave them all the physical stuff. We gave them the equipment, we gave them trainers, we gave them information, that it must not be just the physical stuff, it's more the psychosocial stuff, things that are getting in the way. And it's called life. Life gets in the way. We have competing interests, priorities that are often more important even than ourselves, because we may have, keep tapping on this, don't I? We may have, in order to take care of, part of our responsibilities, our families and friends, and so we always put our own health on the back washer. But those were the impetus for the reason to go ahead and go back to school yet again, because Temple University said, hey, you can come down here and do whatever, what your idea is. So let me take public health classes and counseling psychology classes and put together what was basically a study on differentiating the relapse phase of stages of change theory. And if you are familiar with stages of change theory, is sort of that there's this trans-theoretical model that you have people who don't, at the beginning of the stages of change, are not ever they're not willing to ever change. And then you have the people at the far end who have been maintaining that change over 6 months or more. And relapsers are people who kind of fall in between the cracks of these stages. They drop out after they started in the action phase, and then they don't necessarily have to go all the way back to the beginning, is what we found out from the study, is that we could jumpstart them pretty quickly by doing 3 things that 4 things. You should plan for relapse. It's going to happen. happens twice a year, particularly in New England. It's twice a year. You know, there's New Year's resolutions now, and then there's also that summer transition to the fall when, if you're a parent, you have kids that go back to school, and there's a big change and shift in what goes on, and dropping out again from exercise that you may have started over the summer. And when we talk about exercise, we're also talking about physical activity, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But so we plan for the relapse. It's going to happen. And so how do we plan for that? We increase enjoyment factor, which we talked about already. We also look at increasing the amount of motives that somebody might have. If you have only one motivation, one reason to exercise, that's not enough. And that we also increase our social support network around us.
To my understanding, your study subjects were mostly, I guess, the Northeast Atlantic corridor.
Yeah.
Did that have an impact on your findings as opposed to people in other regions, climates, things? Do you think that had an impact in terms of how, when you talked about the 2 times a year and it can be weather dependent or school dependent? If someone were childless in San Diego, are they less likely to relapse, or is it pretty universal?
So there is, so places like, that's an interesting question because in fact, there are, we know this from athletes, triathletes particularly congregate in San Diego and also in Boulder, Colorado for the altitude training. But in San Diego, the weather is pretty consistent throughout the year. I mean, very consistent, probably the most consistent in this country. And if you want to train every day outdoors, that's the place to go because there's very little fluctuation. But most of us don't pick our cities based upon whether or not how well we're going to perform in a triathlon. We take it on the job or family more often than not. So the answer would be that it would vary depending on the population you pick to answer the question. But if we ask the question probably, because there's a lot of research, Dr. Salas at San Diego was the one who did a lot of adherence compliance stuff, and the same thing, and Dishman were also from out there, and they found sort of the cyclical routine as well that people would go through, more dependent upon the social structure of their day and their life and school rules. For that, when you have kids, and most people have kids, so that would be the general rule.
So for people at that upper echelon, like in Olympic training or something like that, they wouldn't really be involved with this per se because their life is their fitness.
Right. They would be an outlier.
Right.
We would lop them off the study because they participate too frequently. But it's they also. Next week I go to the Cambridge Boat Club to speak to them. They have recreational athletes that everybody, and then they also have Olympic gold medalists out there. And I'm collecting data on them just for that talk, but they have different reasons that keep them motivated to exercise. And that's another issue is the motivation. A lot of times people have one motivation, and the motivation might be to lose weight to get in a wedding dress. And once the wedding comes, they don't have another reason. And time goes by. And so, it's not that the relapse shouldn't happen, it's going to happen, but it's limiting the amount of time that you spend in relapse. And if you have another reason, you'll get back on the wagons quicker. If you incorporate other people around you, and that means you'll have more spokes in the wheel, you'll keep the wheel rolling a lot quicker and a lot continuously. And when I mean spokes in the wheel, it might be that on Monday you go for a walk at lunchtime with a coworker. On Tuesday you take a yoga class. On Wednesday you participate in pickleball, and so that you have a variety of things that you do on a regular and irregular basis that allow you to adhere over the longer period of time. And some of them should be also, the enjoyment factor should be there. There should be fun. And I know what happens for a lot of people, when we say structured exercise, it's not fun for people. They don't like going to the gym. They don't like going to rehab to do their exercises. You get a sheet of paper with the exercises and you come home and you don't do the exercises. But if you tag that into your motivations, so maybe your motivation is was to lose weight, but maybe your motivation also is to play with your grandchildren or be able to do gardening in the spring. Preparing for that activity, so you would need to do some exercise, because if you're going to do gardening in the spring for 6 hours on a Saturday and then come back on Sunday and do more planting after you did all the hoeing, that's 13 hours of exercise, fitness activity that you weren't doing anything before that. And of course, what will happen on Monday is that you might not be able to move. You get what's called delayed onset muscle soreness. And so there's a variety of ways. But if you did some squats and some preparation for that, maybe it would make it easier. And if you also did a little more preparing for that and divided it up over maybe the course of 7 days instead of 2 days. But, everybody gets excited. They want to get their hands dirty. So there is that part of the aspect, too, that you are planning for these things. And then from the social support aspect is that you have other reasons and other people to participate. Once if you're not going to, if your friend who you used to walk on Mondays with no longer is available because they're sick or ill or on vacation or traveling, if you have another plan. So what I like to do with people as well is that they should have an A, B, a C plan, and even a D plan for every day. A plan might have been to get up before the kids in the morning and get on the treadmill downstairs, and that didn't happen because the kids got up before you and woke you up. And so it ends up being that you take lunchtime to go out for a walk or go to the corporate wellness fitness center, but that didn't work either because you had to work for lunch because you had other factors that were more pressing in the deadline. C might have been to come home and take the dog for an extra long walk, and D might be to do a little stretching or cooling down in the evening before you go to bed, some yoga, something relaxing. So there's opportunities, and it doesn't have to be large chunks of time. It can be small chunks of time, too. We're finding out with a lot of our studies that, 5 or 10 minutes of strength training a few times a week goes a lot more to helping long-term muscular strength and endurance and integrity of joints. And that will allow you, if you have strong joints, to go out and do more cardiovascular activity, more hiking and walking. So it's kind of a self-feeding mechanism. One small thing can let you do the things you like to do. Like you'd like to go hiking, but you can't go hiking because your legs are bothering you or you get tired quickly.
So to that point, with all the options for fitness programs and all the studies, we saw in the Times today, another new studies coming, how can an individual pick what is appropriate for them and what is going to allow them to continue in the long term?
So one of the things we look at doing is developing things. We ask people, what it is are you willing to do? What do you like to do? And again, this can be, and what are the things you have to do? So a lot of people will say, well, I have a lot of house chores that I have to do. Whether it's laundry, whether it's gardening, and whether it's taking care. So you can turn those kinds of things into a workout. In fact, one of my favorite things to do is, and this is when the weather is appropriate, even when it's not appropriate because you're indoors doing it, is I will clean. We have a 4-story townhouse, and I will clean from top to bottom and turn that into a 3-hour workout. It used to take longer, but I've gotten wiser and I cut corners now. I don't believe in 100% of anything anymore, so I only do 82% cleaning. But it still gets past the Nicole test. She says this is fine. But so the object would be to lower some of our expectations on some of these things that we do. But if you have the ability to turn some activities that you do into or combine them, for instance, destination walks. If you live in an area like downtown Needham is a good example. If you're on a few blocks away, you can walk downtown to go to some places. You can walk to the library. You can walk to grocery stores. You can walk to the bank. Of course, not good to do in bad weather, but you can combine things that you like to do, or with things that you like to do, like watching the ball game, and also getting on the bike and pedaling. What's been a great bonus for me in terms of adhering in the wintertime, I personally don't like to go to the gym. I run gyms, I manage gyms, but if you gave me my own dinners, I would not go into the gym. I would be outside playing all the time. Play basketball. I play with this guy over here. He jumps over me all the time. This guy also, and I met 20, 30 years ago playing basketball is how we met. So, and we still shoot around. But if you gave me an opportunity, I would play all day and not exercise specifically. But I do my exercises, the few that I do, because I know my lower back, my L4 and L5, have compression in there. I know that if I don't do certain exercises, snap, crackle, and pop. So I do exercises that I know are going to allow me to do the activity that I want to do. And lately it's been a lot of pickleball stuff. So I do a lot of my training is putting bands between my ankles and doing my shuffles back and forth with it. And it allows me to get on the court and play and not worry about conditioning. I get to play. YouTube has been a great thing because I can watch a 10-minute clip of every basketball game I want to watch in 10 minutes. And I don't have to spend too much time while doing that. It shortens my workout, but it makes it more intense as well when it's indoor. I'll be on the bike for 30 minutes, watch 3 games in 10 minutes apiece, and catch up that way, and combine that with something that is necessary for me to do, which is to do the cardiovascular so I can go out and play.
That's I've been working from home since before it was hip, and one of the things that I do is, you talk about wearing the bands, I put on ankle weights all day long, and then occasionally, when I first started working from home, I would say, okay, I have 5 errands to do this week. Monday, I'm gonna go to the post office. Tuesday, I'm going to the supermarket. So I had to take them off to go outside, unless I had my sweatpants on. But, if you're home and, even vacuuming or laundry, do laundry squats. I mean, everything is something. Go up and down the, I was listening to Brian Regan, the comedian, a little bit. He's talking about step aerobics. He said people would wait for the UPS guy to deliver their step, and they would run down their stairs to answer the door. So, a lot more equipment is there. It's really all around you. Just have to kind of be creative with it. So the question I want to ask, especially now, is there are new medications that have come on that are offering what people think is answers to weight loss. Is that going to, how is that going to impact people's reticence to do other things to keep themselves healthy?
Well, the short answer would be we don't know yet. I think what will happen is that it'll be effective for some people, just like any medication is. That's the unfortunate thing about medications. Sort of like going to a group exercise class sometimes. You have, it's a smattering, you're throwing it out there, but the dose may not be right, exposure. And I liken exercise to that as well. The amount of dose you give can be very particular. What you might do for exercise might break somebody else. And what they're doing is far too easy, and it would never elicit the right amount for you. And the same thing is about medications as well too. So I don't know, there'll be people, and that's true about any medication you're on. In my estimation, blood pressure medication is good, but it has to be titered to you. Some of that's weight dependent, some of that's your metabolism dependent. Some of it is that it doesn't work for you at all, and that's true about antidepressives, and so and there's a variety, and that's why there's also competing medications. So I think the other thing is about that, sort of like when it happened 20 years ago, or even more, when lap band surgery became very prominent, that for those people that were prior to getting the actual surgery, you had to participate and pass and install a behavior modification program. Most of the hospitals here in Boston would not do that surgery unless you participated also at the same time in these things. So I'm not quite sure how they're using it in that regard yet, but that should also be sort of a prerequisite.
Whether it's complementary or instead of.
Right.
Yeah.
In coordination with it. So that, this is what also happens for a lot of people who do New Year's resolutions, and why sometimes it's somewhat easier to start a healthy behavior like exercise, at least start it in the adoption phase. Adherence is a problem long term, versus extinguishing a behavior, sometimes like smoking, alcohol, or drug use, is harder to do. And there are studies that say on average 66 days for somebody to make something a habit. Well, if it's taking you 66 days, it's taking somebody no days at all, and somebody 132 days. Do your math, 132 days.
I'm a writer, I don't do my math.
It's a calculation.
Yeah.
But so for an average, so some people take a half a year if they were diligent enough to, and persistent and resilient enough to keep pushing at it. But most people can't wait that long. Medications may or may not help them. Medications may be good for a small amount of weight loss, but may not be helpful to also improve the bones and muscles. So there's another reason why, even if you're doing those kind of medications, that you would also do other activities that would be beneficial, and maybe the combination of those things.
It's the most prominent excuses that you found in your research, and pretty brief chapters on each, very actionable with, one thing I know you have at the end, like an acronym and a mantra, like a little takeaway. First of all, how did you order the excuses? And then how did you come up with, the format and what are you hoping it does for readers, that you set it up in this way?
You remember the movie The Madness of King George? It's not anything like that. But so the book has an excuse, and although there's 50 of them in there, we also have there's a calendar with 365 of them eventually coming up. But there's more than that, and you can make almost anything. It's a derivative of almost 3 basic ones. Biggest one being not enough time. That's a kind of a junk all. I don't have enough time to do that. Well, you don't have enough time because of what? I have to take care of the kids. I have to go to work. So there's the time factor, but there's also really a more specific reason. And if you knew what your specific reason is, if you can tailor it to that, you can counter that. And that's what the strategies do. We have about 8 to 10 strategies to overcome that excuse. Some of them are physiological things that you can do. Some of them are psychological mindset stuff to entertain yourself with. And some of them are humorous. Like, for instance, time would be one humorous one. I think it was, Dr. Sachs said, if you can figure out how to put a 25th hour in the day, maybe I'd exercise, because you would use that extra hour for that. And oddly enough, when I've worked with some people, and this with triathletes like to do 3 runs, 3 bikes, and 3 swims, or it's called a brick, where they combine some of these exercises to them, and then they also like to do their strength training. But if you look at a 7-day calendar, that just doesn't work. So we make a special calendar for them that lasts 9 days, and they rifle through their calendar, and it's a different way of changing how you look at your week, and whether or not what you can fit into your week is different. They have less weeks in the year. There's also an acronym in there, and that mostly became because I spent 18 years working in the military, and everything's got an acronym in the military. And it's kind of entertaining after a while, because we sat around the office all the time just making up acronyms about things. So I convinced Dr. Sachs that we can make an acronym about almost anything. Like your socks would be BASS, badass socks. I don't know if you've seen Matt's socks. He's a very
Talking
good
about fitness, I have to wear my daughter's donut socks. It only makes sense.
Are they flavorful or edible?
Not that I'm aware of.
They don't smell either. They don't smell like Dunkin' Donuts.
I wouldn't get that close. But anyway.
And then also the mantra is sort of from the psychological perspective. As a sports psychologist, a couple things we talk about all the time. We try to the self-talk. What is the story you tell yourself? And this has a couple of origins in terms of people also don't give themselves credit for when they do things right. And here's an example. The attribution theory of psychology. if you listen to an interview of an athlete after they have lost a game, they can tell you 10 things that went wrong during the game. We didn't pass the ball around enough. We took, our three-point shooting sucked today. We, didn't work on our blah, 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 down the line of things. Asking what they did right after they won a game. And sometimes the number one answer might be, first off, I'd like to thank the Lord above. And there's nothing wrong with thanking the Lord above, because, it's very comforting, and it's a coping skill and a coping mechanism. But they don't know what they did right. And this is part of the educational process in our country and in a lot of our families. I'm not downplaying either of those, other than the fact that we spend a lot of time working on what's wrong, fixing things all the time. But what's right? If you can figure out what you're doing right. I look around the room here, and we have people, hard to believe. I mean, I'm 96 now because of exercise. But there are people who have also lived nearly as long as I. And how did they get there? They must be doing something right in order to get that far in life. And you're fairly healthy. So what is it you're doing right? And keep doing it. And plan for when it's not going right, for one thing. But also that you should take credit for that as well. So the mantra is also to kind of help people realize that you are doing things right, and to put you back into that mindset rather than focusing on what's wrong all the time. Because when you do things that are right, and you know it, you can build upon it. Now, this also changes, and the motivations change. Like when we were like kids, teenagers, we often participate in physical activity for socialization purposes. You want to hang out with your friends. You went out for teams, sports to hang out with your friends. Then maybe competition becomes the reason why you're motivated to do your exercise. When in our 30s and 40s, it might be that now we're having families and we want to set a good example for our kids. We want to have, or we wanted to, in our 20s, do it for beautification so that we can attract the right mate. But what happens actually as we age is we do it more for health reasons. And then when we retire from our occupation or our family chores, we go back to our childhood reasons for participating in physical activity, which would be socialization. Again, becomes very important. And if you go to the gyms, you'll find the retirees working out there at between 9 and 11, just quiet hours. The morning rush has gone by, the lunches, and so it's a ritual. And when we talk about in sports psychology, establishing rituals becomes important in people's lives. That you do certain things repetitively. We don't necessarily have to wear women's underwear or eat chicken every day like Wade Boggs used to do before a Red Sox game, but you might have your own rituals that you like to do. And that could be from a physical standpoint and a cognitive performance standpoint. When puts me in my best mental framework to write or do creative work is that I sit down with a cup of coffee and a biscotti and get started. But if I don't have my chocolate in the coffee, I'm not as good, and it doesn't give me as much a jolt. So you have to tweak the system a little bit in order to get into flow, so to speak.
So the book has ways to that we might have, you said like looking at the pot, just things that you probably may even do that you may not think of as fitness as working towards that goal.
Right.
Yeah.
And how to get you into that mindset. And it changes, each stage of our life, and each season changes, to have different reasons and excuses to overcome, and the barriers will change. But the thing again is also then to reduce that downtime or the relapse fees.
All right, so you'll get it once and read it a couple times a year.
Well,
it's a quick read, it's a fun read.
Yeah, so the chapters are like 3 to 5 pages a chapter, and they will address that excuse. And some of the excuses you don't have. Some people don't have some of these excuses, but some of them pertain to you, and you might pick up more in that. It also there's going to be more on the website that you can link to. There's other excuses to be followed.
All right, well, I do want to leave some time for some questions. So first of all, thank Dr. Bruce for coming, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Anyone have questions, raise your hand. I'll come bring out the mic.
I'd also like to thank everybody for being here in the library as well as Needham Channel as well.
Hi, thank you so much. That was wonderful. So I have a relatively complex question. So most people who exercise know that when you exercise, you're going to have that endorphin release, which is going to make you feel better. And that's part of what you're referencing as sort of the addiction. You get used to that nice feeling that you get with the exercise. So, but still, despite the fact that you know that, there's a significant degree of just lack of motivation to even do it. So, and I think that that tends to come up with age for various reasons, stress, time, all those things you mentioned. But do you have, in your years through this, have you found anything physiologically that actually counters the endorphin release or the receptors that make it so that that lack of desire to exercise overpowers the knowledge that the endorphin is going to make you feel good?
Interesting in topic in terms of one of the things I was talking with somebody just before here, coming in here today. She's doing a study and looking at pain and how that often in reporting injuries, people who perceive pain and the perception of pain. Part of the discussion was also that exercise for some people is very painful. They never get the endorphins. Their body doesn't allow them to get to that point. Sadly, and some things by choice, they've chosen to participate in type of exercises and won't allow that to get to that point where you have to get your heart rate up and for a period of time, and for most people it's about 20 minutes before they can break into that, if at all. So part of some of the research on this is that people are wired differently. And an example of this I'll give you is two famous marathoners. One of them is from around here, or Bill Rogers, and Frank Shorter were both competitors in the 70s and 80s. And Frank Shorter had a much lower VO2 max, which is aerobic capacity, than Bill Rogers. Yet, he was able to run at a greater percentage of his max. He was able to push himself. He was basically redlining it all the time he ran, which is amazing. He could tolerate the pain. It didn't bother him. And so what I found in a lot of my research has been, I've been doing hardiness research, which is mental toughness. Certain people are, hardiness is a double-edged sword, because some people, part of hardiness is commitment, control, and challenge. They will take responsibility and they'll report their injuries and therefore seek treatment. But there's the other part of people who are also very high in hardiness that do not seek out medical treatment when they get injured. And this is very typical. Also, this is soldiers. Athletes are a lot like this, people who are supposed to get the endorphin, which may be deadening the pain for them. So they don't report their injuries, and they get hurt and injured because they push themselves too hard. And these people are also high in hardiness, which is also resiliency. So we're seeing it be sort of a double-edged sword a little bit, in that we get people who push themselves too hard and end up injured. And then we have people who are, they also will report the injuries a lot quicker and get well quicker, is what we want them to do. But it's the perception of pain is different, just like the perception of them actually making that chemical transfer. So there's the neurotransmitters that go around the brain and around the body and saying, this is fun, the endorphins and catecholamines are being released. And then there's the people also, the opposite end of the spectrum, who are having it, and it's saying, this is painful, this hurts, and backing off of doing exercise. So there's, there would be a great way to measure that, which would be a nice project for people to work on, so that we can identify those people that are more likely to be susceptible to injury and illness, and as well as how to make it more fun for some people, short of injecting them with endorphins and catecholamines, and allowing them to feel that. Stressors and stressors, the body has a cycle twice a day for most people. Cortisol is released early in the morning, it wakes us up and we get more stimulated, and it crashes in the early afternoon and we take a nap, and then it comes back again later in the evening, or late afternoon into the evening, but not as high, is a natural occurrence, and we can artificially change that by what we eat, what we do, our activity level, and some people can override it because they're mentally tough, and that can lead to people not complying with their exercise if they become injured. So I wish there was a way to, to bottle it from the people that are high in it, have too much of it, and get a lot more out of it, because there are people who just that'll never happen to them because they are not wired neurochemically, physiologically to achieve that benefit that we say we can get from it, sadly. Do you get the runner's high or get the endorphins?
I think I do when I exercise. So when I look at myself, like I know that I would get exercise, but I'm used to a high level of activity. But now I'm not in shape enough to do that high level. But when I go out, I still want to do it at that high level. I'm impatient. I don't want to run slowly. I just want to run fast and get it at that pace. And so that's, it's sort of that's a double-edged sword. Because if I'd agree to just going slowly, I could probably work myself up to doing it fast, but I don't want to have to work at that pace.
So one of the things that happens as we age, unfortunately, as a distance runner all my life, I reserve my running to a couple times on the basketball court, if my Achilles tendons allow me to. And pickleball is a lot easier for me because there's not as much running as being on a tennis court even, which it's a lot of ground to cover, or a badminton court, which is a lot of jumping around. But one of the things that we need to do as we age and or those people who have difficulty making unrealistic goals, is that your expectations should be changed and lowered for certain things. Shorter bouts of exercise, more frequently perhaps, adding things in rather than thinking that you can go out and do 2 hours of exercise. Those days are less and less likely because the ramifications are that the body recovers slower, that we need more recovery time. So I have clients that I work with as personal training for 25 years or more, and they may have gone on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday routine, but not for their higher intensity workouts and then a little smattering in between. And now it's Monday and Thursday because they need more recovery time. And that keeps them going. And they do smaller things on their own time or with other people. I'm just one spoke in the wheel for them.
One of the things I think that helps with exercise is getting it when we're young. And we are so fortunate to live in Needham, because when my daughter was going to school here, 70% of the kids were involved in team sports. So she learned at a young age. She was on the cross-country team, track and field, she did soccer. The thing I loved when she was doing cross-country is there were no tryouts. Kids were encouraged. Even the slowest person on the team, everybody would be cheering them on. Their teammates would be cheering them on. And in high school, that's what everyone needs, encouragement, right? It was a different story in soccer. There was a lot of criticism and, comments from the sidelines. And I used to cringe sometimes thinking, what is this person going to feel like when they get off the soccer field? But anyway, as we graduate from high school, get into our adult years, if we haven't gotten that at that age, it's harder to pick up those habits of exercise and well-being. And having grown up in the 60s and 70s, I saw a lot of people getting exercise when I was younger. I mean, we would come home from school, we'd be out the door, getting together with our friends and playing kickball and kick the can.
Go play in
everything.
traffic, right?
Well, I don't know about playing traffic.
I used to get that.
We didn't do that, but today, kids across the country, a lot of kids come home from school, they're sitting in front of their computers or their smartphones or whatever, and I'm a nurse. I'm an oncology nurse by background. So in the 80s, a lot of people were my size. In the 90s, they started getting heavier, 2000s heavier. I mean, we're at an age now where, back in the 80s, if you had a big boy bed on the floor, it was very unusual. Today, I mean, you could have a lot of big boy beds on the floor because people have gotten so much heavier. So, and that concerns me because our weight, puts us at risk of a lot of chronic diseases. So how do we make that transition? And then, in the schools, I mean, as I said, we're lucky to live in Needham, where it's part of the culture to be on a sports team, but there's a lot of educational systems in the country who are cutting out physical education. It's not part of the curriculum anymore. So how do we put into place those things that are going to help us to stay healthier, to help our kids, our grandkids to be healthier?
My cross-country coach made practice, our teams when I was there were so small because practices were so hard. When I got to college, I was running less mileage than I ran in high school for a 3-mile run. I ran 18 miles for in 1 week, in a day, each day for 18 miles. We ran 3 miles in the morning and then 18 after school, 21 miles for a week in high school. Could have ran a marathon off of that rather than a 5K. The amount of injuries from that was dramatic, I have to say. When I was coaching with my old high school coach, I said, why do you make this so difficult for, this is the 1970s, right? Why do you make this so difficult for these kids? And he looked at me, and he's been coaching for years, and he's passed away recently, an English major, and not a exercise physiologist. He said, I only want to work with the pure athletes. And I was sitting with him at a bar at the Kinney cross-country championships in the Bronx before the race was going on, because we were fortunate enough to have a good enough team with kids in it. I fell off the back of the bar stool, and I said, what do you mean by that? He goes, I don't, you've been in this business long enough, you know how to get rid of the deadwood and only work with the real athletes. And I said, wait a second, you're turning a 15-year-old off from a sport that doesn't require anything other than a pair of shoes and a pair of shorts, something he can do for the rest of his life, and you're telling them that to make it so hard right now because in a sport so we agreed right there, if I was to come back and coach in the future, that I could work on getting a B, C, and a D team ready for him, a funnel, and making sure that we had younger kids. Maybe they can't work out as hard as the seniors and juniors, and they shouldn't. And working with them to develop a bigger program. And we, but in the 3 years I was there, we went from like having 12 people to having 36 people on the guys' team and about 30 on the women's team. In a sport that you don't need equipment for. You just need a pair of shoes. So even though we grew up in the same time frame period, there was still a lot of that going on back then. It made it difficult, but we still had phys ed classes at least, and we don't have that anymore. And we have people who are unprepared for protecting our shorelines, participating in potentially putting themselves in harm's way. So, I don't know what the solution is other than we have more people like yourself as grandparents to make sure that these things are instilled, because we do have an epidemic in this country of obesity, and that has other ramifications of diabetes and orthopedic problems from having carrying around too much weight and having back problems. So it's all and this country, part of it has to do with COVID over the last few years, but, our national, our life morbidity rate has gone up and our average lifespan has gone down. And we're not necessarily the top-rated healthcare in the world, although we live in the best area of the world for that, if you particularly want exploratory surgery. So there are shortfalls of that. Families can make, as a good support system, getting them started. Townships are, like Needham are great. People are looking for that. Even kids, when they go to college now, they have, wonderful recreation centers. When I went to college, it was like if you didn't participate in the sport program, there wasn't really much of a rec center to go to. And now, colleges are pumping in all kinds of money to have these facilities that are, multi-million-dollar facilities. So we're going to have, from a social stat platform, we need more individuals willing to run volunteer programs to get kids more active. Sad but true.
And on that happy note, all right, we do need to start wrapping up, folks. So wanted to point your direction. Very health-conscious snacks from my friends from WBZ. No sugar added, low-calorie serving chocolate. It's amazing. The cookies, a veteran-owned company, one of my favorites, and actually alcohol-free wine. Gay Ellen was checked that as soon as she came in. It's like, we're not allowed to have wine here. I was like, I got it covered. So please help yourself. Bruce and I will be signing and selling books. Obviously, if you have any more questions, please come up. And we hope to see you for the rest of the series. And thanks for helping us kick it off. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for coming.